Welcome back to Humankind. So straight from the developers themselves on the Games Together website, we have this, an announcement of Humankind's first sort of proper patch. We've had a couple of hot fixes for some bugs, but this is the first one. And we've got some reasonable amount of fixes to get through. I'm going to leave them playing down the bottom right hand corner of the screen until they conclude, so you can get a feel for the sheer volume of fixes that we're dealing with, but there are some important ones as well that I want to bring your attention to. These specifically changes and additions that they highlight at the front of the notes, but also some others down the line. First and foremost, the broadening generation conditions of oil and uranium deposits. This is going to be to reduce the risk of not enough deposits spawning on the map. This is a big issue. I've talked about this already. Many of you may have experienced it. Basically, some of the more advanced weaponry in the game, like the intercontinental ballistic missile, the nuclear missile, requires 3 uranium, and in some worlds, only 3 or 4 uranium was appearing in the whole thing. So if you weren't an expansionist, or you didn't have easy trade access, you were sort of out of luck. You were unable to get it. But it wasn't just uranium, oil and aluminium as well, which restricted a lot of late game movements in particular. The developers have acknowledged it. They've said, look, we see this. Initially, it sounds like, by when they say broadened generation conditions, it sounds like we're just going to up the spawn rate, rather than perhaps some more complicated things like giving us the ability to synthetically produce oil, but maybe down the line. Next up, technology endgame condition is now triggered by having every endgame tech instead of having every technology in the game, I think is what that's supposed to say. And then the number of cities contributing to a shared project is displayed on its pin. That second point is minor, but that first point is important. For those who don't know, Humankind ends when the turn limit is up, but there are also other ways to sort of trigger the end game if you want, at which point the civilization with the most fame is the winner. Now, one of those conditions was completing the end of the tech tree. They've now said, actually, you need to complete that out a little bit more. You need to have all of these technologies at the end, not just the final 4, because of course in Humankind you can jump around the tech tree a little bit more than in some other 4X titles. So a nice tweak to that rule, not one that many of us will encounter, but sometimes. Next up, there are these wampers at the bottom of the page. The first one is to do with cultural wonders again, changing the bonuses provided by some of these. That's all of the detail they give, and I combed through the forums to see if I could get a feel for what else might be being changed, but there just wasn't anything there. So all that we can anticipate from this one is that some of these more powerful cultural wonders, some of their abilities are going to be sort of tuned a little bit. Buffed or nerfed? I don't know. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. I can't think of any off the top of my head that are ludicrously overpowered. But the way that, for example, the Angkor Wat scales with food and faith, that could be an issue maybe. Some of those scalings to do with population and territories, my thinking. The rest of these points, though, all contribute towards how the AI handles things. How it handles their units for sieges, city walls, right? How it handles shared projects, how it handles upgrading its armies and military objectives. And overall performance to the AI is receiving a buff, and I think this is probably a welcome buff from a lot of us. The AI in Humankind, to be fair, as far as 4X games go on day 1 or week 1 or month 1, it's actually pretty good, credit where credit's due. But of course, there are lots of gimmicks and flaws with it, and so it's nice to see them paying attention to it already in this first patch. And by the way, I should note, this first patch is actually already live in the betas menu on Steam. So this is something that's been in the works from really early on, because not to bore you too much with the details, but it does take a little while to push these things through the system. So a lot of these changes that are being beta tested were worked on days ago already, and I think that's an even more positive sign for Humankind and Amplitude Studios, the developers behind it, that they're moving along really nicely. The next sort of tier of the update, and arguably the only other really important one aside from a whole host of bug fixes, and man, there are a lot of them, as you will have seen at the start of the video. It took me about a minute to get through the entire page, and I'm sure you wouldn't have read them all, but take a look at these ones. These are some particular fixes that the developers thought were more noteworthy, right? Instead of just lumping them in with all the rest, they were like, hey, look at these things. Fixed an issue where the number of players, or all players rather, that will remain stuck on the new tenant unlocked notification if other players have already selected all available tenants. Basically, we're fixing the glitch where the religious tenants breaks the game. We're fixing an issue where the end of the turn could hang when an AI empire tries to build a wondrous extract tile on a tile which is not connected to a main plaza. Basically, as you go through this list, you'll start to get a feel for what it's fixing. At the top here, it's fixing these key game-breaking glitches which left humankind on the turn timer. You would go down to try and end the turn, maybe you would be able to click it, maybe you wouldn't, but regardless, it would leave you hanging. You'd be stuck, waiting for the turn. It would be pending or hanging. I actually had this live on stream, and I've heard from lots of you guys in the comments that you've encountered this as well. From time to time, don't get me wrong, it's not like this massive widespread plague of an issue, but many people are encountering it, so it's great to see that they're fixing it. They go on throughout the rest of the patch notes to name a whole load of interesting reasons that were sort of causing it and triggering it to happen. So if you're bored and you fancy looking through about 250 or 300 patch notes, I'd highly recommend you scroll through and have a wee look through. Some of them are interesting, like I say. The rest of the issues, the really important ones that they're fixing, are largely around battle as well, and combat, trying to fix some of those clunky issues with pulling in units, deploying units from reserves. It was a little bit clunky, I found. Here you're going to watch me as I come into a battle in this gameplay, and it can be a little bit clunky to deploy and redeploy, and like I say, then support them from or retreat. Lots of little issues, and they're getting on top of all of those, which is absolutely fantastic to see. And then, as I said at the beginning, the remainder of these notes, literally about 80% of them, are various fixes from across everything. And some of these, actually, when I was reading them, I'll highlight a couple that piqued my interest here in the last part of the video, but some of these actually, when I read them, I was like, oh, I actually think that might have happened to me. For example, AI fixes, of which there are about 15 more, fixed an issue where expansionist AI empires kept triggering trespassing on a player's territory. So expansionist empires have this thing where they can trigger their affinity ability and they can make a claim on a territory that is yours, providing they meet a few preconditions. And I kept having this happen to me, and I couldn't figure it out. And it was obviously a glitch to do with my game. Another one fixed an issue where in a few cases nomadic AI armies are assigned to regular claim missions. Weird little things like this going on, and those are just the AI ones. There's a list of about 10 for military fixes and also UI fixes. A couple of ones to note again, and one that I found, there were a couple of issues with Edo Japanese, and also another unique Japanese unit, the Naginata Samurai emblematic unit as well, where models were grouped too close, they were clipping together, sometimes causing game-breaking issues. The point here is they're getting on top of things. Do have a look in the comments if you want to look through all of the issues. I've highlighted the main ones. Again, these are very early patch issues that they've probably moved on within the first day or so to get this patch in beta mode. Now, for our development and digestion, I would say, and again, this is just my predictions, but I would say probably next week. I'll be sure to cover the full details when we know more, including around those cultural wonders on the channel. So do stay tuned, and until then, everybody, take care.